So I had so many different ideas about things that I wanted to talk about. So you pick up one thing and the whole world comes up. And then at the very last minute, it changed. So we'll see how it has some continuity. We'll see how. I hope this isn't too disjointed. I don't. I don't think it will be. I hope. I wanted to talk about Tassajara because I was at Tassajara. I practiced at Tassajara. I did practice periods. Tassajara Zen Mountain Center. Tassajara, it says right here, is regarded as the oldest Soto Zen monastery in the United States and was founded in 1967. I was invited down there because I'm one of the facilitators and creators of the Wildland Firefighters retreat, because Wildland Firefighters have been coming in and saving Tassajara for years. And one Zen center knows that, and they know it would be really nice, good to be nice to these people because they need them, and they're also just enormously grateful. And the firefighters want to know what's going on in that valley. They've been touched and moved by the practice. So I and my partner were gifted a week at Tassajara to be a guest, which I'd never been before. And as it turned out in the course of the week, people kept saying to me, "Would you just be a guest?" And I said, "I don't know how to be a guest." And particularly in these circumstances, because going down to Tassajara, I thought, the world is the world. And then, of course, the world comes to San Francisco Zen Center and all the issues of the world and what everybody brings in the door. And it's all there at San Francisco Zen Center, just like it's all here in our little Sangha, but our Sangha's littler and not quite as big, so it's not quite as amplified. But then you go down into Tassajara and down into this deep valley. And of course, the whole world is going to be there. And we know this isn't such an easy time in the world. So Tassajara and the mountains and the waters and the sun and the moon and the stars. There was a full moon. We did a full, you would have loved it, Sally. We did a full moon ceremony outside. And someone said because there had been divisions in the Sangha. It was part of what was going on. It was the first time that they've ever fully understood how a Sangha comes together in a full moon ceremony to repent and to heal and to pledge themselves to the Bodhisattva vow. So Tassajara is Tassajara. You can't take away Tassajara. You can't take away the land and the history and the deep spiritual. This is part of what I want to do, is I just want to share the history of Tassajara that I think, so when we got there, there were 2 cases of COVID that had been isolated, but everybody thought it had all quieted down, and it was quieted down. It wasn't spread at all. But the feeling of going backwards is suddenly we had our masks on and people weren't doing service because you just did zazen, and because service is you're afraid that you could contaminate the people next to you. And then there were supply chain problems. I got an email before I went down that said, we can't get enough towels down here. Would you please bring your own towels? And then when we got down there, usually there's these beautiful, those of you who go, there's these, for the guests, there's these beautiful red cloth napkins. And some days we were using brown paper towels in the dining room for our napkins. It's like this thing about supply chain is what a surprise. It shows up at Tassajara, which of course is it's showing up everywhere. And then there was deferred maintenance, is you don't use something for 2 years and then you turn it back on again, and systems started breaking. So when I got down there, the hot tubs weren't working. Ah! And they were just madly, these Zen students trying to put things together. And so we got to review the whole history of the people that were my generation that had taped these pipes together that many years ago, and they had to retape them. And of course they got it going because that's what Zen students do. And then the next day, the samovar, which is where the coffee came from, broke down. So there was this feeling of, oh, it's sort of the way the world feels sometimes these days, right? It's like, what's going on here? And then and then there were also, because Zen Center, like all Zen centers, is trying really hard to open and make themselves accessible and to repent about how we became so white and upper middle class, and to invite in people of color, which is beginning to happen. And of course, it's difficult and rocky, and it was spilling over in work meetings and in ways that wasn't always functional. And so people were also becoming dispirited. So you can imagine all of this together was, of course, I went and worked in the kitchen. What else would you do? It's like you burn yourself completely. You don't stand to the side and be a smoky guest. And by the end of the week, the decision was made to close the guest season for the rest of the summer after a lot of effort and energy and enthusiasm to reopen it after the pandemic, which was really hard on people because suddenly everything changed, and all the plans that everybody had made and what they thought Tassajara was and what their summer was and what the world is and what the world isn't. Um, and there was this feeling of, we just need to stop. We need to stop and feel where we are. And what's the way forward that takes care of everyone and takes care of this valley and takes care of our practice? And I deeply trust. I trust the mountains and waters. I trust the place. I trust the practice. I trust the practice at Tassajara. I trust the practitioners that I know and love and cherish, and the old timers and the new timers I met down there. And it's Earth Dharma. You listen to where you are, and it goes all the way through, and you just take care of this moment. And whatever you think is wrong, there's plenty of things wrong. If you open your heart and your body and feel your breath, you're available to take the next step and the next step. I sort of said a little in the newsletter, if you saw it. David Zimmerman, the abbot, was down there, one of the abbots, and he had been one of the 5 fire monks. We're going to get around to why I did this quote about fire and smoke. And he was one of the 5 people who stayed in, what year was it? The 2008 fire basin fire that came, big basin fire that came into Tassajara, and everyone was evacuated, and these 5 monks chose to go back in to save Tassajara. Now, whether that was wise or not, but I'd never heard David's. I've read the book Fire Monks, which I would recommend if you want to know more about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit today. But he gave an on the spot, he could feel the anxiety and the uncertainty and the change and the unknown. And he stood there in work circle with everyone, and he said, he started to cry when he was saying it. He said, I've tried to talk about this before, and this happens every time. But I was down here in this valley with 4 other people, and we did not know whether we were going to make it out alive, whether my friends were going to make it out alive, whether the buildings were going to make it out alive. And you just realized that the only thing you could do is take care of what was right in front of you. This is Earth Dharma. Take care of what is right in front of you. He said a fire would break out here and then one would break out up here. Can you imagine? Just fires everywhere. Sometimes the world feels that way. And he said, just what's in front of you, take care of it wholeheartedly and trust somebody else is taking care of what needs to be taken care of in front of them. And they did make it out. They were lucky. He said, that's what this is like now. Uncertainty. I know you're anxious. I could say to you, maybe when you think about the climate or the earth or what's happening, sometimes it makes you anxious and uncertain, despair. Just take care of what's in front of you fully and deeply. So I wanted to read you something from this is A Wild Love for the World, Joanna Macy in the Work of Our Time, edited by Stephanie Kaza. It's a section, this one's by Tig and Dan Layton, and it's about time. It's one of my most favorite parts of Buddhism, is that it talks about time. I never understood time. I remember I was in 4th grade and my father pointing to a clock on the wall and saying, how can you not understand those things, those little hands going around and all those little dots and all those little numbers? It was so clear to him and it made no sense to me. You might imagine this caused me a few problems in the world, but I ended up in Zen, is when you fully burn yourself all the way through, not burn yourself, but wholeheartedly do whatever you're doing, you are in timeless time, which takes care of the past, it takes care of the present, it takes care of the future, it takes care of the 10 directions, the great above, the great below. I think indigenous people always knew this. It's like in Zazen. You sit down on the ground in the center of time, in the center of the mandala. And your thoughts go, wah, wah, and you can run around and you can chase them, but you notice what it feels like when you do that. And then you just say, come back. It's just what David was saying to everybody at Tassajara. People were worried. Just come back. Just take care of this moment. It will take care of all moments. In the realm of being, time, elaborated in the writing of Japanese Zen founder Eihei Dogen, time does not only flow from past to present to future. Time moves in mysterious ways, passing dynamically between all 10 times and beyond. Time is not some intractable, external, objective, or independent container we are caught in. We are time. It's a little bit like that Wendell Berry quote that Erica said, is Wendell Berry saying something like, we're in the environment. What do you think you're in? You are the environment, and the environment is you. Time is you. There is nothing outside of this time. When we fully express ourselves right now, that is time. We cannot avoid fully expressing our deepest truth presently in this being of time. And even if you only half-heartedly express yourself, that's also completely, partially expressing yourself half-heartedly. So you can't get it wrong. Whatever it is, give yourself to it fully. Isn't that nice that Dogen gave us, he didn't expect perfection. It's just be here. Give yourself fully. Dogen said, in being time, there is the distinctive function of passage. There is passage from today to tomorrow, passage from today to yesterday, passage from yesterday to today, passage from today to today, and passage from tomorrow to tomorrow. This transpires because passage itself is the distinctive function of time. Time is alive. The world is alive. Tassajara is alive. Whatever you think is just a thought. in a particular moment that contains all of time. Take a breath and let it open and find out what it teaches you. Inhabit fully all times, rather than seeking some present as a restricted escape from regret for the past or anxiety over the future. That's what David was saying. Don't get caught there. And he knew, and you could feel it when he told it. When he told it, you could be in the time when he was there in Tassajara and there were fires everywhere, and he had no choice. And how beautiful that he was able to extend that knowledge to all of us standing in that circle. And everybody took a deep breath. He transmitted the earth Dharma of timelessness and of take care of this moment. Throughout his writings, Dogen emphatically highlights the responsibility of practitioners. You, me. When we realize that we are it's hyphenated and I think they left a letter out. When we realize that we are being time in this very body mind, there's no getting out of it. We can choose to be and act from our deepest and noblest intention, not from fear, not from regret, not from running from or to. We can choose to express our being time in a way that connects with all beings here now and also connects with all beings, all our ancestors throughout the generations of past and future. We can be a time that accepts and supports the guidance from all beings of all times. This is really important. Otherwise, we start feeling isolated and alone and despairing, more and more self-enclosed, and then we turn against ourselves and we turn against each other. That's what I felt happened that was so beautiful down at Tassajara, is the depth of practice. Is yes, everything's changing. Yes, we don't know what's going to happen. But we'll take the next breath and the next breath. And we'll listen to the sun and the moon and the stars, and they become more and more vibrantly alive. They become your friend. It's like Gretchen said to me early, before you all got on, something about how the wildflowers were her friends. She knows where they are and she looks for them. The wildflowers were amazing. And any one place that you've been does become part of your body. And Tassajara, I hope I can transmit a little of that if you haven't been there. And if you have, I can help you remember. And some of us may get to go down for Sangha Week. That hasn't necessarily been canceled, so we'll see what happens. But I thought, I started looking at Tassajara history. You could go to Crooked Cucumber on the website. There's great pictures. How much it's so easy to think in my short time span of knowing Tassajara, well, this is the way it's always been. There's always been summer guest season. There's always been practice periods. This happens at this time and then that happens at this time. And it's just wrong. It's really wrong if something different happens, if they cancel the guest season. It's really wrong if somebody's talking about maybe the guest season won't happen again. Maybe that's not the best way to practice now after Buddhism being in this valley for all these years. Maybe things are changing. What's the appropriate response? And then when I started looking at the history, and I'm not going to have as much time as I wanted, maybe not as much time. Maybe you don't want to hear all of this anyway. But I wanted to, so many changes in that valley. Just like if you imagine the piece of earth you're on right now. Like when Chelsea and maybe others did a land dedication. We think, this is my house. This is the land I stand on. It's mine. And then you look and you listen and you realize how much you are just part of a chain of breath and being, and how much it will go on after you. And how much, because I know I'm in a fire belt. Bruce and I walk around now and we see the trees around us and we see the char marks on the old redwoods. You know, this has happened before. It could burn to the ground, and something going down in Tassajara. I remember going down into Tassajara after the 2008 fire that charred everything down to the ground, and the rocks stood out like bare bones. And it immediately started regenerating itself. And now the hills are green again. But it doesn't mean that fire won't come again, or that Tassajara will remain standing. Because when I looked at the history, I kind of knew this, but I didn't know how many times Tassajara has burned down. Not as the monastery, it's been saved so far, but as a place that people identified with as home and theirs, and that they built and that they cared about. Native Americans were the first humans to enjoy the waters of Tassajara hot springs. The group called the Esalen made this area their home. Indians had many uses for the hot springs: preparation for the hunt, a place to renew spiritual energy, as a sweat lodge. There are caves that have been inhabited there for at least 3,500 years. We one day hiked up to some of the caves. I hadn't been up there in years. It's an amazing landscape. The name Tassajara is most likely corruption of the Spanish word Tassajara, which means a place where meat is dried. Summers are often hot, and it's an ideal place to dry meat outdoors. Think how many people, how many lives. In fact, they name not just human lives, but foxes, bobcats, raccoons, coyotes, mountain lions, skunks, rattlesnakes, and an abundance of grizzly bears who often stood 8 feet tall and weighed 850 pounds. They never imagined in their bear imagination that grizzly bears would completely vanish from this part of the world. And who knows? I mean, in timeless time, they're still there in the wildness of the wild. You can feel them. And who knows who will come after we're gone? It's alive. It says frequently there were many tribes at Tassajara at one time because of the great abundance of wildlife of all kinds and fish they had no trouble living there. There's drought in Tassajara now, as there is everywhere. Things are changing. First owners developing the road. This is when you look at Tassajara. If you do any reading about indigenous land rights and how the white migration to the west, of course, it's a Tassajara. And who took what from who and what happened then, and the role of the Chinese and the role, I mean, it doesn't say it explicitly here, but you know when they say workers, probably there was a hierarchy and a caste system of who put in that amazing road down to Tassajara. You start looking at it and realizing how alive and dimensional it is in so many ways. The gold rush of 1849 and the completion of the Central Pacific Railroad in 1869 and the Depression of 1873 all brought people to the West Coast, and the first settler who had squatters' rights at Tassajara was called J.E. Rust. Of course, what happened to the Esalen Indians? They thought their reality was completely permanent. And then it changed a few more times. Probably J.E. Rust thought that he would be on that land forever and ever, and he had hopes and fears and dreams. And then it was acquired by William Hart in 1987, who wanted to develop it for guests, and he put up some tents and widened the trail. And then it passed to Charles Quiltley, who used local laborers from the summit down. The work was done by pick, shovel, and blasting powder. Numerous unemployed Chinese miners and railroad builders in San Francisco and San Jose who would work for 50 cents a day and provide their own food, and then lived in China Camp on the Tassajara Road, is named after the workers who lived there during construction of the road. And we just go down the road. I mean, I go down the road and I think this is an amazing road. Wow, Tassajara Road. Somebody told me a story once. I'm not going to get to tell you half of what I want to tell you, but maybe you'll look it up. Is that it was Dan Welch, who was an old Zen student, that he was, I think, coming in one night into Tassajara on that long road, if you know that road, and he saw Suzuki Roshi walking along the road and out to the point. There's a point on the road that's particularly beautiful. And every time I come to that point in the road, I feel Suzuki Roshi. I think, was that a dream? Is he really there? Who is Suzuki Roshi anyway? And who are you walking this road? And what did Suzuki Roshi think when he traveled from Japan to establish a monastery in the West that is bigger than anything he possibly could have imagined and may need to change form to adjust to this time and in the West? Then in 1888, started building a hotel. They blew up, not surprisingly, because we did this a lot, used dynamite to blow up the rocks and to shape them to create the hotel with Italian stonemasons. They came all from the way from Italy to blow up rocks in the Tassajara Valley to build with the help of Chinese laborers. What an amazing world. And we think it's ours. And then in 1946, the owner was killed in an airplane crash, and his wife decided to open the springs on her own. And then fire started in the cabin that was caused by her, it says. Yeah, well, in a room that was a nursery for their 3 children. And the flames went from the cabin to the treetops and then to the eaves of the hotel, which burned for 4 days. And there were 40 guests and 22 employees present, and everyone pitched in to fight the blaze, and no one was seriously hurt. And then it changed some more, and then the Becks got it, and the Becks sold it. Then Suzuki Roshi, across the sea from Japan, on this planet that we call Earth, somehow landed here and somehow was invited by the Japanese congregation in San Francisco, and then Western hippies started coming and sitting, which of course the Japanese congregation, that's not what they thought was happening, but Suzuki Roshi just kind of went with it. And then one day somebody took him down this road into Tassajara, and he said, oh, this is where we're going to do the first Zen monastery in the United States. And people raised money, and then it happened. And then it kept burning down again and again. And there's a whole other history here. And in fact, I'll just tell you one part of it if I can find it. Because when I was there, I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. I'm amazed how much history gets forgotten. Is the Zendo at Tassajara burned down within my lifetime? And new people didn't even know that where they store the boxes, where when you're chopping the vegetables, if you go down as a guest and they say, and you have an empty box, they say, toss it over the rail and say, box. And then somebody goes and packs up the boxes and takes them back up the road. Of course, think of the 100 million people, causes, and conditions that created the box to begin with, and what happened in the box is that was the old Zendo that burned down. Here's the story, if I can find it. We said, "Do you know what that room is down there?" They went, "No." Hold on just a second here. We'll see if I can find it. Oh, my dear. Oh, I can't. Oh, I can't find it. No. Anyway, they had propane refrigerators and they exploded, and people were sitting in the Zendo, and the fire started spreading, and they just barely got out alive and stopped the fire. And so that Zendo that you see now, if you go to Tassajara, sitting up on the hill, was rebuilt after the original Zendo burned to the ground. The history of the number of fires in Tassajara is totally remarkable. I just wrote them all down. Let me just see if I can find. Maybe I can't. 1902, 1949, 1970, 1977, 1999, 1949, 1978, 2008, 2013, 2015. Everything changes. Everything changes. And the only safe place is just right here, this moment. Fully, completely take care of this moment. Suzuki Roshi says, when we do something, do it with your whole body and mind. As David Zimmerman, the abbot, said, don't let your mind wander into the past or into fears of the future. Just keep coming back. Be concentrated on what you do, and when you do something, do it completely, like a good bonfire. Not smoky. Don't be a smoky fire. This is called Zen activity. It is the goal of our practice. This is what it means. Ash does not come back to firewood. Ash is ash. Ash should be completely ash. Firewood should be firewood. That's in the Genjo Koan, any of you who remember it. If this kind of activity takes place, one activity covers everything. This is the goal of our practice. Takes care of the past. It can actually heal the past. And it helps create the future, and the future that we hope for ourselves and for all beings, whatever piece of earth you're standing on. This is what love is in the deepest sense. Just take care of things right here, right now. I'm thinking about whether to put you in small groups or whether you'd talk to me if I left you all here.